Hi and welcome to Terry Talks Movies. It's Science Fiction Saturday again, and I've got a little bit of a hidden gem movie, and the way it's hidden is really interesting. So let's get started. What if I told you there was a 2023 science fiction movie that has a lot of the same feel as the 1950s Robert Heinlein juvenile novels that he produced in between his other works during the 1950s. That kind of teenagers in space kind of vibe. It's a really interesting film, and Disney killed it. I'm going to tell you about the film, and I'm going to tell you why I think Disney killed this particular film. It's a movie called Crater from 2023. It came out on Disney Plus this year. The script was written by a guy called John Griffin, and he sold it originally to 20th Century Fox. But when Disney acquired 20th Century Fox, they liked the script and they put it in production. It was in their sweet spot. It was a movie for young kids and teenagers and tweenagers, and it felt in some ways like a Disney movie, so they put it in production. They spent about $53.4 million on it before all the tax breaks were calculated, and they released it earlier this year. And it's a really interesting, not perfect science fiction film, but there's some really great world building in it. There's some great imagined locations. There's a good ensemble cast of young actors, and it ends on a really unusual grace note. So what's the movie about? It's about a kid called Caleb, played by Isaiah Russell Bailey, who lives on a lunar mining colony in the year 2257. Well, I'll be 300 years old then. He has three friends, Dylan, Barney and Marcus, who he hangs around with. They go to school, they learn things. Caleb's not in a good way. His father's just died in a mining accident, and one of the death benefits that he gets as a sole survivor, his mother had died years before, but one of the death benefits he gets is that he gets a free ticket to travel to the new home of humanity, which is a planet called Omega, which is 75 years travel away. He would get put into suspended animation, travel to the new Earth in a sense, and live his entire life there. Caleb thinks at first that he's got 2 months until the next ship goes to Omega. He wants to spend as much time as he can with his three friends. And he's also got a promise he made to his father before his father died. His father gave him a map and said he has to go to a particular crater and see what's there so he better understands his parents. So the four of them decide they're going to steal a transporter and drive to the crater and see what's there. But they need help because they don't have the codes to unlock the door, letting them out of the space settlement where they live. So they recruit Addison, a young girl who's just recently moved to the moon from Earth. She came with her mother because her father and mother separated, and her father took her younger brother with him to Omega, leaving the mother and daughter behind. So they moved to the moon, and Addison is a fish out of water. She's an Earth person in a world where most of the people have been living on the moon for many generations. But Addison knows the code to get out of the airlock. So the entire station is locked down because there's going to be a meteor shower and things are going to get very dicey for a while. But the team decide they're going to go anyway. So they basically hotwire one of the transporters and drive across the moon towards this crater. They have some adventures on the way. They have a game that they play with oxygen tanks, which is very interesting. And they look across the lunar landscape and see things they never knew existed, because the education of the kids in this mining colony is only restricted to things that people who mine helium need to know. So they don't know anything about history, they know very little about music or literature or culture, or even the history of the Earth. And Addison knows this stuff, so she tells the guys that their education is very limited. And their world is very limited in other ways too. Once they become 18, they have to work for the mining company for 20 years before they get a chance to go to Omega. And if they die before that, any children they have the remaining years added to their sentence working for the mining company. It's a very draconian and nasty piece of capitalism that this moon base works on. So as they travel across the lunar surface, they see there's a half-built and really beautiful lunar city sitting on the surface, which was never completed because Omega was discovered and everybody just went there instead of building a civilization on the moon. They need the moon for the helium, which powers the rockets to go to Omega, but apart from that, it's deserted. They find a condominium complex where there are some beautiful houses that have just been left derelict because people didn't want to live on the moon anymore. And so they're going through the remnants of a failed human civilization as they head towards this crater and the secrets that lie there. The kids are all a bit goofy. There's Dylan, who is the kind of pretty boy, but he's not terribly smart at times. There's Borny, played by Orson Hong, who is a scared kid because his brother has messed around with his head and gaslit him with a whole bunch of ghost stories about the moon when he was a little kid. So he's scared that there are ghosts on the moon. And he's a little bit angry about that as well. And there's another kid called Marcus whose ancestors have lived on the moon for a number of generations. And because of that, he has an enlarged heart. There is artificial gravity in the transporter and in the moon base, but the rest of the moon has none. So he's been changed by generations of his ancestors living on the moon, an environment that people aren't particularly suited to. And so he has to take his medication regularly to stop himself having a heart attack, essentially. So they travel across the moon surface, finding out things about the world they live in that they didn't know, both from talking to Addison and from the things they discover. So Caleb takes them to the crater, and there is something at the crater that's very, very important to him and for him to get closure on the death of both of his parents. Of course, there's the meteor shower which hits and imperils the kids and smashes up their transporter a lot, and they bond together and survive the experience. And then in the last part of the movie, other things happen which are perfect for the film, but also really challenge the world in which these kids live. It's a nice little piece of science fiction. It's got fantastic world building. It looks good. The special effects aren't as perfect as they would be, say, in a $200 million movie, but they are really serviceable. The ensemble cast of young actors works really well. We come to understand the mysteries of the world in which these kids live at the same time the kids do. And even though it does have a kind of a happy ending, it doesn't have an unnuanced one. It doesn't have a comfortable, neat one. It has one that's a bit messy and a bit interesting, and not the direction I thought the ending was going to go. Now, you can't watch this movie because Disney left it on Disney Plus for a total of 48 days. It was taken off with no fanfare, no announcements. They just took it off the way that Netflix has done with a number of their things. And it's an interesting thing that they particularly chose this movie, because I think there's a reason. There is something happening here which directly relates to the strikes in Hollywood at the moment, and particularly the targeting of Bob Iger, the head of Disney, and the stuff he is doing and not doing. And the reason I think that is, this movie is a Trojan horse into Disney. There's a very dark understory. The world these kids live in is a world of exploited, underprivileged and poor people, so that privileged people can go and live on another world and have their life in a beautiful way. It's also a pro-union movie. As the movie resolves, we find out that the lives of the miners end up being improved because they unionize, they negotiate with management, they get reasonable compensation and adjustments for the hardships they experience, and they actually kickstart a resurgence of lunar civilization by confronting and addressing the pseudo-slavery they've been living under for many generations. And I don't think that played well to Disney management. This is just my take on it. I think Disney canned the film because it's pro-union, it's anti-capitalism, it's anti-egregious capitalism and greed and neoliberalism and the unfettered power of corporations. And I don't think that the Disney brass liked that. So what they did was they simply took the movie off the platform and said nothing about it. And that is really interesting. I think had they left it on the platform, some people would have watched it, and then they would start talking about parallels between the plight of writers and creative people and actors and others during the current strikes in Hollywood, and making parallels between the circumstances of the miners in Crater. And I don't think Disney wanted to try to spin that, so they did the next best thing for them, which was to kill the film. Now, there's no evidence that the movie is ever going to be shown anywhere ever again. I'm fairly sure they're not going to do a physical media release of it for decades, if ever, if physical media lasts decades. And the only way you can find it is through means both illegal and subterranean. I'll just leave that one hanging there. It's good science fiction. It's not perfect science fiction, but it's about the future. It's about the lives of human beings and how they're changed by technology and through their own actions. It does good world building. It gives us something we haven't quite seen before in science fiction cinema, and Disney has killed it. If anybody's thinking of nominating for the Hugo Awards next year for Best Dramatic Presentation, my suggestion would be shame Disney and nominate Crater for the Best Dramatic Presentation in the Hugo Awards next year. Really stick it to them, nail them to the wall, confront them with their own gutlessness, and make them release the movie again. Not sure whether I'm going to have any traction in doing this, but that's what I think. Again, it's not a perfect movie, but it's good for kids. It played well to me as somebody who's way beyond being a kid, and I like the world that it built. In some ways, it feels like there's an ideological optimism in the same way that Brad Bird's movie Tomorrowland had. Again, another Disney movie which didn't get a lot of traction. I think that we've got to watch corporations when they make movies. We will know them, and we will know the quality of their minds by the things they shun, the things they ban, and the things they bury. So there are my thoughts on that one. I think if you can find a copy of it, it'll be worth your time to watch it. If you can't find a copy of it, I am sorry. A bit different for science fiction, but again, it has some parallels to the science fiction of earlier decades, and it does very much have the feel of one of Heinlein's juvenile novels of the 1950s, but without the sexism. It's got a very diverse cast, along with one or two adults who do a good job as well. And it has something to say about current circumstances in the world. And you can't ask for more than that with science fiction. So that's it for this time around. If you enjoyed the video, please like, subscribe, and leave a comment. You can also support the channel by becoming a channel member, and the means of doing that are in the description of the video. You can also support the channel again by becoming a patron at patreon.com/TerryTalksMovies. Next up, I've got more hidden gem movies, this time covering the letters S and T. That's going to be a lot of fun. Wednesday, I've got a bit of a haul that I got. Some interesting movies that Imprint and Vision have put out this month. Then, of course, we roll back to Science Fiction Saturday, and it's Groundhog Day again. So until then, watch some good movies, watch some bad movies. Watch out for Disney, and I'll catch you next time.